Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, my name is Alessia and I make videos related to writing, lifestyle, and true crime. And today we're actually doing another true crime case, and it's a pretty popular one, at least here in Toronto, and that is the case of Honey and Barry Sherman, or aka the Billionaire Murders. So if you're interested, then please keep watching. Okay, so like I said, the Barry and Honey Sherman case is one of the most well-known cases here in Toronto, and I actually remember this happening back in 2017, and I was shocked when it happened, as well as the entire world. Barry and Honey Sherman were actually philanthropists, and they were worth a startling $3.2 billion. And nothing really bad is supposed to happen to people like Barry and Honey Sherman. So Barry Sherman was born on February 25th, 1942 in Toronto, Canada. And Barry was an incredibly intelligent businessman and philanthropist, like I said, and was worth $3.2 billion at the time of his death. Forbes actually ranked the Shermans as the 12th most wealthiest people in Canada. So these people are not messing around, they have money. In 1973, Barry founded the pharmaceutical giant Apotex, which here in Toronto is a drug company that makes like prescription drugs and stuff like that. And Barry actually remained the chairman and CEO of this company up until his death. So he ran this company for years and years. It was his baby, it was his life's work, and he loved it. So in 1971, Barry married his wife, Honey Sherman, and the couple went on to have 4 children together. Honey Sherman was also a philanthropist, and she spent her time donating millions of dollars to charities in Canada as well as charities around the world. So the Shermans were definitely generous with their wealth. So to the wider community, the Shermans were loved and admired for their generosity and their success. But behind the curtains, Barry was actually a very cunning and ruthless businessman. And over the years, he actually made a lot of enemies, rivals, and people who just didn't like him. Critics claimed that he was greatly overcharging Canadians for their medications, and he was always fighting over patents with other smaller drug companies in court. So he was basically just fighting with smaller businesses, I guess, to screw them over and just to make sure that his business always stayed on top, which I guess you can't really fault him for. I mean, he's a businessman and, you know, that's just a business practice. But that is what he was like, reportedly. But it should be noted that Barry Sherman always thought that Apotex was a force that was being used for good and that his business was a Robin Hood style business. So, you know, he took from the rich and gave to the poor. And whether that was true, you know, it's not my place to say, but that is what he thought. So on December 13th, 2017, real estate agent Elyse Stern arrived at the Shermans' home in North York. So the Shermans actually hired Elyse to sell their mansion in North York because they actually wanted to move to a wealthy suburb in Toronto called Forest Hill. And that way they would be much closer to their business clients, their friends, and just their social circle. So they actually really wanted to sell their house, and on this particular morning, Elyse was just bringing by an interested purchaser. So Elyse calls the Shermans to tell them that she is bringing an interested purchaser over to the home, and weirdly enough, the Shermans do not answer their phone. And Elyse kind of brushes it off. Yeah, it might be weird that the Shermans weren't answering their phone, but the Shermans were incredibly busy people, and if they didn't answer their phone, they were probably out doing something. So Elyse decided to bring the client over to the house anyways and to show them the house and give them a tour, even though the Shermans weren't answering their phone. So Elyse gets to the North York home with the client, and she actually sees the Shermans' cars on the driveway. So Elyse goes inside with her client, and she notices that 2 people are actually inside. So the maid is home and is cleaning, and then the gardener is home and they are watering the plants on the property. And that is the only people who appear to be home. Like I said, the Shermans weren't answering, and Elyse just decided to go ahead with the house tour. So Elyse begins to give a tour of the house, which is massive, by the way, and takes the client in all of the different rooms and eventually brings the client down to the indoor pool, which is on the lower level. And the indoor pool is a major selling feature of the house, so of course the interested buyer wanted to see it. So Elyse opens the door, and unfortunately she is shocked to see something that she probably will never forget in her entire life. So as Elyse walks into the pool room, she unfortunately sees the deceased bodies of both Barry and Honey Sherman. So the couple were found semi-seated facing the pool, and they were actually found hanging from the railing around the pool with a leather belt. So Elyse obviously takes her client out of the house and calls 911. And when the police arrive, they're actually incredibly shocked by the scene. So the Shermans were both sitting upright, but the weird part was that they were found without a hair out of place. The only thing the coroner eventually noticed was that there were some defensive scratches on Honey's face. But other than that, the Shermans both looked physically perfect. Another weird thing about the crime scene is that the bodies seem to eerily mimic a statue that the Shermans had in their family TV room. So obviously the perpetrator tried to imitate this statue, which is really terrible. I feel really bad for their kids. But this is what the picture looked like of the statue. So due to the Shermans' wealth and status, the media understandably went into a frenzy and they began swarming the Sherman home. Now, as the investigation began, the police announced to the public that there were no signs of forced entry into the house, and they really couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. And it was then the police announced that they actually had a working theory of a murder-suicide. So their theory was that Barry killed Honey and then killed himself in their pool room. Now, this understandably made the Sherman family and kids very angry. No one who knew the couple could ever imagine Barry killing his wife Honey. They loved each other, they had a good marriage, but besides that, the couple were actually very old. I mean, Barry was 75 at the time of his death and Honey was 70 years old. And not only that, but Barry actually had declining muscle mass and bone mass just due to his age, and both Barry and Honey were the same weight. So it was extremely unlikely that Barry would, get the physical strength to knock out Honey and kill her and just drag her across their huge house. It just didn't seem likely. So this theory really made people mad, and the Toronto police got a lot of criticism for this. Now, this is really unfortunate to me because, in my opinion, just based on the crime scene, there is no way that this was ever a murder-suicide. And this is actually really unfortunate because when the funerals of Barry and Honey Sherman commenced a few days later, the entire population of Canada, and the rest of the world for that matter, were under the impression that Barry murdered his wife Honey and then killed himself, which is just terrible and not true, as you will come to find out, and it really just tarnished his reputation. So like I said, the Shermans were obviously really angry with the Toronto police and their theory of a murder-suicide, so they hired their own team of professional detectives and lawyers to investigate their parents' death and to find out what really happened to the couple. So finally, in January of 2018, so just a month after the Shermans were murdered, the Toronto police actually came out and publicly announced that they now believed the murders were a double homicide instead of a murder-suicide. Which, I mean, come on, really, you couldn't tell that just by looking at the crime scene? But whatever. And as the investigation commenced, it was actually proving to be very difficult. The Toronto police really could not identify any suspects for that matter, and there was just no information, there were no leads. The case was actually going cold very fast. There was just nothing to go off of. There was no forced entry, no fingerprints, just nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. So the police were having a really tough time with this. Even with the Sherman family offering a $10 million reward that would lead to an arrest, still no suspects were ever brought to the public's attention. However, the one main theory in this case, which is what everyone pretty much believes, including myself, is that the Shermans were murdered by someone who actually knew the family pretty well. So Barry and Honey both died by strangulation, and strangulation is a very intimate and personal way to kill someone. So for example, just shooting somebody in the head across the room would be much less intimate than grabbing their neck and getting on top of them and strangling them. So this indicated to the police that the person who murdered Barry and Honey probably had a grudge against them, or were just angry at them, or something along those lines. What further added to this theory was that the basement door was actually unlocked because the Shermans didn't really lock their basement door, and they were actually painting parts of their house because they were selling it, and a window had been left open in one of the rooms. So just from that information, a lot of people think that the Shermans were specifically targeted by someone who had a grudge or vendetta against them, and this person probably had some sort of knowledge about the interior of their house. And like I mentioned before, this theory isn't really that big of a stretch because Barry had a lot of enemies and rivals just from being in business throughout his large career, and this is what the police started to focus on. So the Toronto police have always been incredibly secretive and private about this case, and I understand why. I mean, it's such a high-profile case and high-profile victims, so there actually hasn't been any publicly verified suspects. But there are two suspects in particular that a lot of people believe could have been involved. So the first suspect that many people believe might be involved is actually Barry's cousin named Carrie Winter. So Barry's career began in the 70s after his uncle passed away, and Barry decided to actually purchase his uncle's pharmaceutical company called Empire Labs. And Barry eventually turned Empire Labs into Apotex. So when Barry's uncle died, he left behind 4 young boys, and these 4 boys would go on to try and sue Barry in the years following. So this gets a bit legally complicated, but I'll try to explain it the best I can. So Barry's 4 cousins tried to sue him, and they pretty much claimed that without their father's company, Empire Labs, there would be no Apotex. And because of that, they were entitled to some of Apotex's profits.
After some digging, Carrie Winter uncovered a long-buried family agreement. He learned that when Barry Sherman bought their father's company, he agreed Carrie and his brothers could each acquire 5% of it. But Carrie says their cousin Barry never told them anything about that.
So his cousins pretty much wanted what they thought was their inheritance or stake in Barry's company, which was a lot of money, by the way. So there was a lot of money on the line here, and money makes people do crazy things. But unfortunately for Barry's 4 cousins, the courts actually ended up siding with Barry. They believed that the 4 cousins had no stake in Barry's company, and the 4 cousins were actually ordered by a judge to pay Barry $300,000 in legal fees. And Barry was really mad about this lawsuit, and he actually was trying to get even more money from his cousins. He was planning to try and take $1 million from his cousins in just court fees, lawyer fees, and stuff like that. It really seems to me that this was a personal fight to Barry. He obviously didn't need the money because the man was a billionaire, but it really seemed that this was based on principle, and he really just kind of wanted to get his cousins back. Now, the Winter family were just regular middle-class people, and I cannot imagine the rage and humiliation they probably felt when they were ordered by the Canadian courts to pay their billionaire cousin more of their own money.
He cared about one thing: money. Making lots of it. And not caring who he destroyed, who he stepped on, or who he fucked over, like me and my brothers.
And in my opinion, this legal battle and fight between the Winters and the Shermans could have easily cost Barry his life. Now, in my opinion, this fight between the Winters and the Shermans really does give the Winters motive for possibly murdering the Shermans. Now, of course, just having a motive doesn't mean that you actually did something. Carrie Winter actually said in a Fifth Estate interview years ago that he actually fantasized about killing his cousin Barry.
I was betrayed. My cousin hurt me, and now I want to hurt him.
So that is a very telling statement from Carrie Winter. Obviously, it doesn't prove anything, but it does say a lot about him and how he viewed his cousin. And you're of course wondering if the police looked into the Winters, and apparently they did, and all of the Winters had an alibi for the night of the Sherman murder. But to me, that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't hire someone to, kill their cousin. Nothing else has been said about the Winter family since, and they kind of just faded into the background and were forgotten about. So the other suspect that a lot of people believe could have been involved is the couple's own son, Jonathan Sherman. Now, obviously, the 4 children were entitled to inheritance in their father's and mother's wills when they died. Apparently, though, Honey Sherman in particular thought that her children should make their own way in the world. They were educated, privileged, and they should pretty much make their own money. So she kind of wanted to shrink their inheritance and give away, her money to charities and just people who would need it more. Now, if you think about it, shrinking the inheritance could really make Jonathan angry, or any of the Sherman siblings. Not only that, but it's been reported that Jonathan was angry that his father hadn't appointed a successor to Apotex because Barry Sherman was a workaholic and he had no plans of retiring. He just wanted to continue working, and apparently this really upset Jonathan. He was also worried that Barry's other business ventures were shrinking his own and his siblings' inheritance. But is this really enough to make someone kill their own parents? Now, I personally don't believe that Jonathan had anything to do with his parents' death. I actually saw a clip of the Sherman funeral, and I saw a clip of Jonathan himself giving a speech. And in the video, he looked so emotional and torn up and just so horribly upset and just grief-stricken. I mean, understandably, it's his parents, but he really did not seem like he had anything to do with his parents' murder. He just seemed like someone who just lost their mother and father. And if I can find it, I'll actually insert maybe a little clip of it here.
But together, you unlocked the whole world for yourselves.
The only other theory other than Carrie Winter and Jonathan Sherman is that this was just a robbery gone wrong. So the Shermans did live in a wealthy neighborhood in North York, and apparently their neighborhood was targeted for robberies. But it's not very often that robberies end in murder. People who steal stuff from you, they aren't murderers. It takes a lot to steal from someone, and it takes even more to kill someone. That is a big jump to me. So I really don't think this is the case. In my personal opinion, I really think this was a professional hit that was put out on the Shermans from somebody that knew them. And if you think about it, there was no evidence that was left behind, no fingerprints, no DNA evidence, literally nothing. And the way that they were placed, so perfect looking, really indicates to me that the killer knew what they were doing. So as of filming this video, there has been no arrest made in the Barry and Honey Sherman case. The Shermans' private detectives closed their investigation in 2019 and handed all of their evidence over to the Toronto police, who are currently investigating. So in 2019, the financial records of Barry and Honey were sealed, so all of the information from the will and stuff like that. And to me, it would be very interesting to see where the money went after their deaths. I think that, could tell a lot about the people closest to the family. However, I'm sure the police are looking into it. Apparently, the Toronto police have a working theory of what happened, and I'm sure they're investigating it, but no charges have been laid. But I really do think that something will come out about this case in the future. Hopefully it's an arrest or a suspect or honestly anything. I would love to see this case solved, and I really think it will be. One good thing has come out of their deaths, and it was announced that in June 2019, Barry's fortune would be mostly given to charities. So if you're interested in learning more about this case, there's actually a book that has been written on it, and I just googled it, and it is called The Billionaire Murders: The Mysterious Deaths of Barry and Honey Sherman by Kevin Donovan. So if you're interested, go ahead and read the book, and feel free to comment anything that I missed in this video. If you have any information on the deaths of Barry or Honey Sherman, please do call the Toronto tip line, and I'll put the number on the screen here. But that is all for today's case. I hope you guys liked it. It's a really popular and mysterious one, especially here in Toronto. Please like and subscribe to my channel if you aren't already, and I'll be back next Tuesday for a brand new video. Bye guys.